All right. I think I got it now. I'm just gonna have to do a couple of, I'm just gonna have to do a couple of tweaks here with this. So I've got multiple cameras, I've got multiple different things going on. So we're gonna see if this works. So it should work now. All right, yeah, perfect. Thank you, Steve. All right, so anyway, I'll repeat everything that I said earlier. So this workshop is called Keeping It Simple. There might be some scientific things, but it's all about PA systems. And it's geared towards those that need to purchase a PA system and don't quite know where to begin because there's a lot to it. You could be starting up a concert venue and you might want to have a system installed. You might be setting up a rehearsal space. Maybe you're renting out a rehearsal space and you maybe want an installed PA system. So it's less stuff for, bands or artists that might be renting out your space, less stuff that they need to bring. You might be starting a band and you might need something to gig out with. Especially if you're playing a venue that doesn't have a supplied sound system, or if their system is rather inadequate, and just is not a very good system. You might be planting a brand new church or a house of worship, and you might need to have something installed. You might be an organization or a business or whatever that might be looking for something portable to take to things like a cookout or any kind of an outing or activity or things like that, where if you do have an installed system, you might want something more portable. Or you might be just curious. You might be a geek like me that loves equipment and gear and technology and things like that, and you might have gone to a concert or any of these events that have this really cool, elaborate sound system, and you might be thinking, oh, I want to know more about that. You might be getting into, running sound at a church or for a live concert venue, and you want to know how all this stuff works. We'll definitely be talking about that. Just checking out the comments here. Hey, Sean. So if you see me walk off camera, my laptop that's running StreamYard is over here, so I've got a whole setup over here. All right. And then I've also got a slideshow. Now, what I don't know how to do is I don't quite know, nope, which one do I want? Do I want that? No. Do I want that? No. We'll just have to go without. All right. You'll just see both cameras. So what's happening is I want to have my close-up camera and the Pro Presenter going on at the same time, but my audio is actually coming from the wide camera. It was just the quickest way to kind of set things up, and I also set it up for a live, workshop in case anybody showed up. But it's just you and me, so let's have some fun. All right, let's start with what is a PA system? A PA system, or a public address system, is a system for addressing the public. It can't get any more simpler than that. Now, when you think about maybe the history of, say, a church, like the building that I'm in, it's about 100 years old. The room that I'm in kind of is its own PA system because it was designed to carry sound because of the way the ceilings are. There's like 25-foot vaulted ceilings in here. So if you had a choir up in the loft, the sound of that choir could carry right over your congregation. So this room, you're probably not going to be able to hear it on my mic here, is rather reverberant. It's rather, it's very live. So some rooms could essentially be their own PA systems. But here are some kind of cases, like I said, of where a PA system might be used. We have concerts, we have assemblies, for public speaking, for, business meetings where you might, even if you don't have any speakers, you might have a bunch of microphones set up into a mixer, into some kind of an output, whether it's going to a recording or a live stream or a Zoom meeting, whatever. Outdoor gatherings, so if you've got a band playing, or if you have, a DJ setup where you've got some music playing and you want a microphone to make announcements or things like that. And then a house of worship like where I am right now, that's an application for a sound system. Now, the way I look at it, and I'm going to keep it really simple, on a big grand scale sound system like you would see in maybe like a 6,000 or 7,000 seat, theater, any kind of those concerts, there are a lot of different components, but I'm going to keep this to just 3 components. We're going to keep it to the microphone or another input source, the mixer, and then the amplifier and loudspeakers. So that's how simple we're going to go. Yeah, so Cresshead says, ambient or reverberant rooms can be good or bad. Yes. So again, it depends on, if I was going to see a classical concert, for example, like with a big 80-piece orchestra and a choir, I'd want that room to speak for itself. So that's a very, very good, very, very good point there. And by the way, anytime you see me walk off the camera, I'm just checking the chat every once in a while because my laptop is, over here. But you can see me, you'd still be able to see me over on the bottom camera. Okay. So the first component in this list we're going to talk about is the microphone. I'm actually wearing one right now. A microphone amplifies or picks up anything that it hears. It's kind of where it all starts. Now, I do want to talk about 2 main types of microphones. There's actually 3. There's many, many different types of microphones. In the recording world, there are 3. But we're going to just talk about 2 different ones. We're going to talk about the dynamic microphone, which is what I've got, which is what I'm holding right here. And then we're going to talk about the condenser microphone. Let me just open this up here. I got a couple of examples. So these are a couple of examples of condenser microphones. The one on my right hand is a large diaphragm, and the one on my left hand is a small diaphragm or a pencil mic. So let's start with the dynamic microphone first. So the dynamic mic uses a capsule that's similar to a loudspeaker. It's a big magnetic coil. So it's like a speaker, but it's wired in reverse. So in essence, if you wired a speaker, backwards, it could wind up being a microphone. It's actually a pretty popular technique for recording bass drum, where you really, really want to capture some low end. Some recording studios will use a reverse wired speaker to capture really, really low end. So the bigger the diaphragm in the microphone, the more low end you're going to capture. So the other couple of points about a dynamic microphone is they're not as sensitive as condenser mics. So they can pick up a lot of volume. So they're really good for miking up loud things like drums or guitar amps. They're they're like the go-to for live vocals. Now, because they are not very sensitive, the ideal position for this kind of microphone is about 1 to 2 inches away from your mouth. I actually go right on the mic because I've got a lot of low end in my voice, and I want to make sure that it captures that low end. So I go right on the mic. I eat the mic, so they say. So if you're a singer, it's really important that you're right on this mic. Don't hold it down here. It's not going to quite pick up what these microphones, the way the microphone is designed to pick up. You want it right here. So that's a dynamic mic. A condenser mic It's a little bit different. Condensers work on the principle of variable capacitance. In simple terms, they work as a battery. So when sound waves vibrate the diaphragm has a magnetic plate that's behind it. When that happens, it creates a boost of voltage, which is sent through a phantom power supply. So it's sent through 48 volts to increase it before it's sent to the output. So most of these mics are a bit more sensitive, so the source should be, I'd say, between 3 to 6 inches away for the best results. But in any case, whether you're using a dynamic or a condenser mic, experiment. Try different things, try different placements, and see what you think sounds best to you. So these mics do require power. They require phantom power, and phantom power is supplied by the mixer, which is the next component in our system, but we're not quite there yet. I want to talk about how a microphone picks up sound. So how a microphone picks up sound, it's called its polar pattern. There's many different polar patterns, but we're just going to focus on two. We're going to focus on the cardioid pattern, which is at the top. If you look up in the presentation, so that's a picture of a cardioid polar pattern. What's happening is, if you look at the very, very center, that's where the microphone capsule is. And what's going to happen is the microphone's going to pick up from the front, a little from the sides, but it's not going to pick up anything from the back. So it's really good for getting better isolation, especially for vocals and for drums. You can go even a little bit more narrower with what's called a supercardioid, but cardioid is kind of the more popular choice for a polar pattern for a dynamic microphone like a vocal mic. Just looking at my comments. Now, the other polar pattern I want to talk about is omnidirectional, or omni, and that's what this microphone can pick up. So what omni is it picks up sound all the way around the microphone. So from the front, the sides, the back, all the way around the microphone. So these are really good if you want to pick up something a bit more broader than what a cardioid mic would pick up. So for example, if I were to walk over, if you look at the bottom camera, if I were to walk over to the drum kit and I want to mic up this whole kit with maybe one or two mics, just take a pair of omnidirectional mics and just stick them right over the drum kit. So I could place this microphone maybe right about here, and it should be able to pick up the entire kit. Now, I will say something extra about condenser mics. Some condenser mics, like this one that I'm holding here, this is the Behringer C3, this will allow you to choose the polar pattern. It will allow you to choose how this microphone picks up sound. And there's three options. There's a cardioid option, there's the omni option, but there's another one called figure 8, and that's the front, the back, but not the sides. Something in the chat. Yep, exactly. Cresshead says omni is, and I'm reading the chat off of YouTube for anybody watching on Facebook. Very good for for conferences and things like that. So yeah, an omni mic, or even maybe two of them, those are good for picking that kind of stuff up. If you're, let's say if you're a church and you're live streaming, and you want to maybe feed some ambient microphones right to the live stream, but not come through the PA, that's also where omnidirectional mics are good as well. Yep. Figure 8, good for, conversations for two people. And like I said, that's not covered here, but it's the front, the back, but not the sides. So you could have two people facing each other, like this, and just stick the microphone like this. could be cool for two singers, especially in the olden days of recording. All right, so that's a little bit about the polar patterns, and that's a little bit about the microphones. I will talk about how to hold a vocal mic a little bit further in the workshop, because there's another point that I want to make with that, but I want to save that other point later on. Now we're going to talk about the next component in our system, which is the mixer. As I flip through my notes here. So before we get to the mixer, in its simplest form, a PA system can simply include a microphone, an amplifier, and a loudspeaker. If we think about, and even simpler, the amplifier and the loudspeaker can be one unit. Now, in the world of public speaking, you can have a lectern or a podium that could have its own built-in sound system. You might have a microphone permanently attached to the top of the podium and then permanently wired into an amplifier and then a speaker on the front of the pulpit. Or in church speak, the pulpit is the podium. And then that would just simply need to be plugged into power. Now, if multiple microphones or instrument amplifiers are needed, yes, it is possible that each singer and each musician can have their own microphone and their own amplifier and their own loudspeaker. But it gets a little cumbersome, and the stage gets really, really cluttered, and it gets really, really hard for those singers and those musicians to balance each other. That is where the mixing desk comes in. Now, a mixer can balance sound in a few ways. We can balance sound by volume, so we can adjust the volume of each instrument or microphone coming into the mixer. We can adjust the panorama or the pan position, and that is on a stereo system, the position between the left speaker and the right speaker. So doing that, it creates a little more space and a little more room, and it makes the mix interesting. We can also balance different frequencies on each microphone or instrument using something called equalization or EQ. Now, there are a lot of different kinds of mixers. Some are very small, like this one. And this kind of a mixer would be good for, say, a podcaster. So maybe there's a couple of microphones going in. And most of these mixers will either have, stereo outs like this one does, or they might have a USB connection that you can connect directly to your computer. So these are good for podcasting, for kind of live streaming, especially if you're doing like conversation type stuff. Or we can go to the extreme opposite end of the spectrum and take a look at a big 96 channel mixer over there. So that you would mix a whole symphony orchestra or a film score on. So like I said, there's two different kinds of mixers. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my close-up camera and I'm actually going to switch over to a top-down view, and we're going to go ahead and zoom in on that really quickly. And we're going to take a look at a very simple mixer. Yep, volume, balance, and tone. Yep. Thank you. So this is a very simple mixer. This is a Behringer Xenix X1832 USB, so it does have two-channel USB on it. Now, we have a bunch of different things going on here, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go from the top to the bottom, and we're just going to talk about the left channel strip and just the first 6 channels. Because if you think about it, each one of these controls is a control for that particular input. So there's a lot of stuff on here, but if you just take a look at one channel strip at a time, it'll help, simplify things a little bit. So there's a ton of inputs and there's a ton of outputs, but I'm going to just talk about the channel strip first. Right here at the top, we have an XLR in. That's for connecting a microphone or any kind of balanced signal through an XLR. And we'll talk about different connection types in a little bit. Here we've got a 1/4 inch input. This is for, this will take either an unbalanced or balanced line. Here we have what's called a low cut, and the low cut, all it really does is get rid of any rumble, any really, kind of low end that you might not want coming through a vocal mic. An example might be if you've got a microphone on a stand, if you touch that stand, that touch will go all the way through to the mic and it might pick up a little bottom end. The other thing is it can also cut down on some breath noise, somebody blowing into a microphone, things like that. You can also use a windscreen for that if, like, you're outdoors. So a really, really simple, way to kind of clean that up. Yep, so exactly, Steve. Once you learn one, you pretty much have all of them. There's a couple minor differences, like with the EQ section, with the stereo channels or the mono channels, but it's really, really minor. Going down, we have an input gain, also called a trim. This is basically how much volume is coming into this channel. You do want to be careful when setting it, because if you set it too high, you might get some unwanted distortion. Going down even further, this particular mixer has a built-in compressor, and simple speak, what the compressor does is it takes anything loud and it squashes it down to meet where the soft is. So it kind of evens out the loud and the soft a little bit. I like using it very, very, slightly on live vocals. You might have to use more if you've got a singer that's really, really quiet and then gets really, really loud and you want to kind of tame that a little bit. Going down, we have a basic EQ section. On most analog mixers in this price range, you'll have a 3-band EQ, which basically allows you to adjust the low, the mid, and the high. So the low is kind of where the bass, lives. The high is kind of where maybe the cymbals or the crack of a snare drum, or the high part of an acoustic guitar, like where you hear the attack. And the mid is for maybe vocals, for pretty much everything else. On this particular mixer, we have what's called a high shelf, which basically it's a set frequency and anything above that frequency. We have a low shelf, so we have a set frequency and then anything below that frequency. But we have what's called a sweepable mid. Now, what this means is you can adjust the frequency of this mid-range that you want to change. For example, if, let's say you need to increase the intelligibility of some vocals, that might live in, and I'm going to talk in frequency range. So the frequency range, typically human ears go from 20 hertz, which is bass end, up to 20 kilohertz, which is super, super high end. So we're talking right kind of in the middle. I find, at least with my voice, the intelligibility is probably between 3 kilohertz and 5 kilohertz. So the high mid range. So I would basically take this frequency and adjust it to between 3 and 5 kilohertz, and then you could cut it and boost it a little bit to help, dial that in. Yep, exactly, or it reduces them as far as the compression. So that's the EQ. If we go over to the stereo channels, there's just one slight difference. That is basically you have a 4-band EQ. You have a high, the high mid, the low mid, and the low on the stereo channels. So that's really the only difference, at least on this particular mixer. If we go down further, we have our auxiliary sends. What are these? These basically allow you to send the channel somewhere else other than the main speakers. For example, a monitor mix. And this allows you to adjust some things on the main mix, like your volume and your panning, but you won't interrupt what the musician hears on stage. That's really, really important. So once they have a comfortable monitor mix, leave it alone. And then if you have to make any adjustments to the main mix, you're not going to affect anything here. This particular mixer has two different auxiliary sends, has a monitor send, and then it has an auxiliary 1. So the auxiliary 1 can be used for either a monitor send or an external effects unit, like a reverb or a delay, if you want something different than what's provided here. And the way that would work is you would basically take the auxiliary output, which I believe is right up here. You would take this out to your effects unit, and then from your effects unit, you would go back into what's called a return, which is right here. So you're basically sending the channel out to the effects unit, and the effects unit has to be returned back to the board in order for you to hear it. All right. And then further down underneath the aux sends, we have an effects send. This is for the built-in effects unit on this particular mixer, and not all mixers like this have built-in effects. This is the pan control, so this pans between the left and the right. So I could say, if I was doing if I was mixing a drum kit, let's say I have a left microphone and a right microphone for your overheads. So for microphones going over the drum kit. So that's what that's for. Further down, we have the channel mute. So this basically shuts off the channel from the mains, and on this board, the monitors as well. Under that, we have assign buttons. Well, the first one we have is a solo button. So if you want to hear only that channel, then you just press this button, and then all the other channels get muted. Be very, very careful with using this on a live sound system. It's better in the studio. This button also has a different function called PFL, or pre-fade listen. Let's say you're adjusting the input gain and you want to see where it's hitting as far as the metering goes, which is over here. So you kind of want to hit between -10 and -5 dB, but how do you check that? Well, if you press this, and this button is in pre-fade listen mode instead of solo mode, now this meter is going to show you, and we'll see in when we set up the sound system in real time, which we're going to do a little later on. We're going to connect all this stuff. I'm going to go back to here, to this view of the soundboard, and you're going to see me, you'll see me basically adjust a microphone and show you how that all works. So that's useful for basically checking how much gain you have going into the channel. Underneath that, we have assign buttons. We have a subgroup assign. Now, what a subgroup does is you can basically group multiple channels together. Let's say you want all your vocal mics over here on one subgroup. You can then adjust the level of your vocals all at the same time, and then maybe you want your instruments on another subgroup. And then you can adjust your instrument, the volume of your instruments at the same time. So let's say you've got a good blend of your vocals and your instruments here, but you want to control the overall levels. That's what that's for. And then you have your main mix assign. This assigns that channel to your main speakers. So that's the channel strip. If we go to the right side of the board, we have a master section. And the master section is different on every mixer. Look at the comments. Like button, I like that. Yeah, please hit the like button. So the master section over here has different controls over your subgroups, your master outs, your master monitor send, your auxiliary send, your effects send, all of that. I would say make sure if you buy a mixer, make sure you read your manual, the owner's manual that comes with it. If it doesn't come with an owner's manual, it comes with a quick start guide. get a PDF of it online. If the manual is well written, it should explain the master section for you. If it is not well written, I would go onto YouTube and see if you can find some video tutorials on your particular board. But let's take a look at this particular master section. Up here we have our effects section here. This is where we can select which effect we want to use. And this is where we can adjust the effect send, which is basically a global send. So how much of these channels is going into the effects section. And the effects return is right here on its own fader, and that can be assigned to the subgroups or to the mains. Down here we have a master EQ, and this particular EQ has a feedback location. So each one of these faders has an LED in it, and if the system starts to feedback, that LED will light up brighter than all the other ones, so you'll be able to tell where it is and just kind of cut it down a little bit. It's also useful for kind of tuning your system in a way. I prefer to use a bigger 31 band EQ because I've got more fine-tuned, control over it, but this will do just fine in a pinch. Below that, we have an master send for aux1. So this is basically how much of aux1 is getting sent to wherever it's going, whether it's your monitors or your effects. Below that, we have an aux1 return. So if you're using effects, this controls how much effect you're going to hear if you wind up using the aux1 as your effects. Over here, we have XPQ surround. I don't bother using this. This is kind of a special feature of this particular board, and I haven't messed around with it. And then the same thing with the voice canceller. This basically cancels out the center position on anything coming into the 2-track input. So from your phone, it would basically cancel out all the vocals, so you can kind of sing karaoke with whatever. And then down here, we have your monitor send. So this is how much of the monitor mix is going to your monitor speakers. And then here we have your subgroup assigns. So you can assign to either the left channel, the right channel. If you're doing, say, vocals and instruments, you want them both going to the left and the right at the same time. And then here are your master faders. One thing I will point out is there's a big thick line right across the board. That's what we call unity gain. That's basically where nothing is, as far as like the output volume, it's right at 0 dB, so the volume isn't being boosted and it's not being cut. That's the simplest way that I can put it. Yeah, the feedback thing is really useful, especially if you've got a especially if you're in the analog world, and there are some 31 band EQs that have that too. So yeah, it's definitely handy for finding feedback and seeking it out and destroying it. So that's a really cool thing to have. So that's kind of basically the layout of the mixer. Now, I will say that there's one more thing that I haven't pointed out, and that is there is a phantom power switch on the back of this particular soundboard. On higher end soundboards, each channel will have its own 48-volt phantom power switch. That's used to power condenser mics, like we talked about earlier, or active direct boxes, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Now, if you do engage this switch, make sure to turn your master faders all the way down. Otherwise, you're going to create a loud pop in your system, and you could damage your speakers, or you could damage something else in your system. You probably could even damage a dynamic mic, because dynamic mics do not require phantom power. So it's best to, at least for me, if you need phantom power, have it turned on before you plug anything in. And even then, you should have everything plugged in before you even turn on your mixer or anything. All right, so that's the mixer. I'm going to go back to my group view here, and then we're going to talk about the amplifier and the speakers. So out of the mixer, we hit the amplifier and the speakers. Now, there are two main types of speakers that we're going to talk about. We have passive speakers. Now, a passive speaker requires a separate power amp, and a power amp usually comes in a big rack-mounted unit, and most of them will have two channels, a left channel and a right channel, because where you place your mains in a stereo setup, you're going to have one on the left and one on the right. And then also a power amp will have its own level controls as well, and maybe a couple other features too. For example, if you were going to use the power amp in mono mode, you could bridge the two channels together and combine the amount of power that's in that amp into one channel. But what we're going to talk about today are active speakers. So active speakers have the power amp built right into the speaker. So they are a lot more convenient than hauling around a rack of power amps, because you'll need a power amp for your mains, and then you'll probably need a separate one for your monitors. That can get pretty heavy because a power amp can weigh anywhere from 30 to about 70 or 80 pounds, depending on how old it is. But we're going to talk about the active. We're going to talk about the active speakers. Now, in the system that we're going to set up today, we're going to talk about two different positions. We have main speakers. We're not talking about subwoofers, but subwoofers basically help enhance the low end. That's all they do. They're just low end. But we're going to use a set of full range main speakers, and then we're going to use a set of monitor speakers. I'm just going to hook up one single monitor speaker. If you want to hook up a second one, it's done the same way. Now, I will also point out that speakers come in various sizes. And the thing that we really just want to understand, the bigger the speaker, the easier it is for that speaker to reproduce low frequencies or bass. It's important because if you work a speaker too hard, especially when it comes to reproducing, low end, like bass guitar, bass drum, some keyboard sounds, if you're running too small of a speaker, you could wind up blowing out the speaker and damaging it. Sometime down the road, if good bass response is desired, you might consider adding a pair of subwoofers to the mains. And that's a fairly easy thing to do. Again, we won't talk about that here, but there's many tutorials on YouTube on how to set up a pair of subs alongside your main speakers. Now, monitors, like I said, we have mains, we have monitors. The main speakers are placed in the front of the stage, and they're designed for the audience to be able to hear you. The monitor speakers are placed on the front, and they're aimed backwards from the audience. Those are designed so that the artist can hear themselves. So it's really important that the artist has a way of hearing themselves. That's how you know they're on pitch, their instrument is tuned up, you've got the right sound, and an artist has to be able to hear their monitors a certain way. And like I said, when you make adjustments on the main mix, your system should be set up in a way where it's not going to interrupt what the artist is hearing out of their monitors. Now, I will also point out that you want your main speakers to be at a certain height. You want them to be able to carry up and over the audience. You also want them kind of out of the range of your vocal mic, and we'll talk about why in a minute. But I happen to have a pair of speaker stands right over here. If you look at the bottom camera, they're basically designed to hold your mains and to get them in a position where everybody can hear them. If your mains are sitting on the floor like these ones are, really you're just going to get the first couple of rows, and then the further back you go, if you've got a big room, people in the back aren't going to be able to hear what's going on, or it's going to sound really muffled. Remember that bodies absorb sound. So when we get to putting our system together, we'll pull the speaker stands out, we'll set everything up, and we'll talk about that. Speaking of which, we're on to putting the sound system together. Now, when we put it together, what do we need to connect everything? Cables, cables, and more cables. There are a lot of different types of cables. But for this workshop, we're going to talk about two types. We're going to talk about the balanced cable as well as the unbalanced cable. And if you look at the presentation, I've got pictures of the different types of connectors we're going to be dealing with. So let's talk about what the unbalanced cable is first. And I happen to have one, come here you. I happen to have one right here. So it's just a simple 1/4-inch instrument cable. So what makes an unbalanced cable an unbalanced cable? An unbalanced cable has two wires inside of it. One of them is positive, which provides the signal, and we also have a negative wire, which also provides signal, but it also shares the ground at the same time. So they're mainly used for connecting instruments such as keyboards or acoustic guitars, and they use a 1/4-inch TS or tip sleeve connector, which is pictured right up in the presentation. So one thing to keep in mind when you're using these instrument cables is try to keep the length of the cable as short as you can. So these cables can normally go up to 20 feet and have a clean signal. If you go any longer than 20 feet, you're going to start to get things like radio interference, ground noise, things like that, because there's not enough shielding in that cable to protect from that. And you also have to remember that the ground is being shared with the negative wire. So for longer cable runs, you want to go with a balanced cable. And I happen to have a couple different kinds sitting over here. So I'll show you this one first. And we actually have the two connectors that we're going to deal with. This is a TRS, or tip ring sleeve to XLR. And that we're going to be using a little later to connect our monitors. And then we have a basic microphone cable, which has an XLR male on one end and a female on the other end. So now a balanced cable has 3 wires. You have a positive wire and a negative wire, and then you have a separate ground. So there's a lot of different things that are happening here with that balanced wire. So because the ground is separated from the other 2 wires, there's less chance of any extra noise or radio frequencies, in an extra long cable run. Now, the other thing that's happening is because we're running 2 signals at the same time, there's going to be some cancellation happens. So what do I mean by cancellation? Well, when 2 frequencies in the sound, spectrum happen at the same time, at the exact same time, they're going to cancel each other out, and you're not going to hear that frequency. Now, the way a balanced cable works is you might get some noise through that, but the noise is going to cancel itself out because you're running 2 signals, basically a copy of the exact same signal through the one cable. So with a balanced cable, you can go as far as 150, 200, maybe even 300 feet before you start to really have any problems. Sometimes maybe even longer, depending on the cable. I typically, in a live situation where if I run front of house, I'll set the board probably 75 feet back from the stage, and I can run XLR cables, balanced cables right from the board to the stage, not have any issues at all with extra noise. So for our workshop, we're going to be focusing on using balanced cables, XLRs to connect our PA, and we'll use an unbalanced TRS which is tip ring sleeve to XLR that I showed you earlier to connect our monitors. Now, there's one more point I want to make about cables, and that is you can never have enough of them. I would say one of the biggest things that can go wrong on a sound system is a bad cable. It's probably going to be the most popular thing. If you take care of your cables, they're going to last a long time. Yes, that's true, but you never know. You might have a cable go bad on you. So, like I said, if you need a mic cable, get like 4 or 5 of them. You know, maybe even just 3 of them if you need one cable. Because if anything goes bad, then you can just simply swap out the cable. You'll see a picture of another thing on the presentation called a cable tester. So if you think you might have a bad cable, what you'll do is you'll just basically plug each end of the cable into this tester and then turn it on. And then if all of the connectors, you know, that cable have, if they're all good, those particular lights will light up on that tester, meaning the cable is good. If something is not good, either the light won't light up or it'll blink on and off, which basically means you might have a bad cable. All right. So what we're going to do now is if we pay attention to our bottom camera, and actually I'm going to go ahead and enlarge that. There we are. Bang. All right, take it easy, Cresshead. Thanks for stopping in. All right. So now we're going to start to put it all together, and we're going to go ahead and put together our sound system. Now, I've already got the mixer placed here. We'll talk about if you were going to place the mixer in the back of the room. We'll talk about how to hook that up in a little bit in some of the extra stuff. But what I'm going to do is we're going to move some stuff out of the way so I've got a little bit of room to work. There we go. That should be good. And I'm basically going to follow my instruction sheet that I've typed out. So I'm kind of looking at this camera over here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my speaker stands. I've already kind of placed my mixer where I want it. What I'm going to do is grab my speaker stands and place them one on each side of this stage. And I want to go up as high as I safely can. If you go too high, the speaker stand might, you know, topple over, and that's what you don't want. So you want to make sure your tripod, depending on how high you go, you want to make sure your tripod is spread out, you know, far enough to where the stand is not going to tip. We're using 12-inch speakers, and they probably weigh about 30 pounds, so I should be okay. I should be okay with the stand set up like that. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the second stand. One thing that I like to do to make sure that the stands are at the exact same height is to line up 2 of the tripod feet. And if they're in line with each other, then I know that when I set the height of the upper part of the stand, when I set it to the same height as the other one, they're going to match. And now most speaker stands are going to have a safety pin. You want to make sure you put that safety pin into one of these holes on the column where you're going to adjust it. You're going to rest that safety pin on top of the collar. Might be a little difficult to see. You might want to go to full screen. Now when you pick up your speaker stand, try not to pick it up here because this might loosen up. And if it is loose, you know, some bad stuff might happen. All right, so this stand is going to go all the way to this side so that we have a left and a right. The next thing I'm going to do is we're going to place the speakers on the stands. I've got a power cable right here. So as soon as I place this speaker on the stand, I'm going to connect power. Now, all the equipment here is using what's called an IEC power cable. So that's one of the slides that I didn't do. It's a universal cable, and you can get them the equipment that uses them will come with a cable, but if you need a longer IEC cable, you can easily get them on Amazon for not a lot of money. So for your main speakers, I would definitely think about investing in an IEC power cable that's like between 10 and 20 feet. I'd rather have the length, I'd rather have that extra length of cable. All right, so I've got the speaker on the stand. Behind the speaker, where the pole mount is, there's a wing nut. Actually, it's more of like a big bolt with a big head on it. But I'm basically going to tighten the speaker down so it doesn't move. And I'm going to want to point the speaker straight out. I'll explain why in a minute. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect the speaker to power. To do that, I'm going to use a standard IEC power cable. We're going to come into the back. On the bottom is where the power socket is. And I'm just going to plug it right into my power strip that I have right back here. Okay, now that speaker has power. On the back of the speaker, on this particular one, there's a combination input, so it'll take either an XLR or a 1/4 inch. I'm going to use XLR. This is actually a 2-channel speaker, so there's a built-in 2-channel mixer. Really, it's just a level, just adjusting the volume of each of the inputs. But for now, I'm just going to use input 1, and I'm going to set the volume control for input 1. I'm going to set that to 12 o'clock. Now, don't worry, everything is safe. Once I plug everything in and turn everything on, and we'll show you how to do that, my main faders are all the way down, so when I power on the mixer and then power on the speakers, nothing's going to happen. All right, so this is the right speaker. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my XLR cable, and on the back of this particular soundboard, there are XLR and there are 1/4 inch outputs. We're going to use the XLRs, and we're going to connect the right side, the right output. And I'm going to unravel a little bit of cable here. And I want to unravel just enough to get to the speaker. You want to try to keep your cables as neat as you can. Cable management is very, very important, at least in my in my view. It just makes it easier to troubleshoot if you do have a bad cable and you know where all these cables are going. And it makes for a cleaner stage, makes for a cleaner looking stage. I can actually make the stage even cleaner with something else that we're going to talk about in a little bit. All right, so the right side of the right side speaker is hooked up. Let's do the same thing to the left side. We're going to go right up. We're going to go right up onto the top of the stand, and we're going to take the bolt that's in the back right behind the pole mount for the speaker, and we're going to tighten it until the speaker doesn't move. Be careful not to over-tighten because you could wind up either damaging the bolt itself or you might wind up damaging something else. So you just want it to where it's not going to turn anymore. All right, now that we've done that, we're once again going to take our power cable and we're going to plug right into the back of the speaker. And by the way, we want to make sure the power switch on the back of the speaker is in the off position. And then we're going to plug the speaker right into power. And really carefully, I'm just going to turn the speaker on just to make sure I've got power. Yep, it works. Power light's on. The power light's on down here, so we're good. Sometimes if you've got a slightly loose connection on the outlet, it might still be good, but it's a good idea to just briefly turn it on and off just to check, to see if you've got power. Ba, 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 ba. Oh, it's so good to be back on your screen. Okay, so now we need to run an XLR cable. I happen to have one right here. We need to go all the way to that left side. So I've got a slightly longer cable than I'm going to need, but I'd rather have the cable longer than I need than have it shorter than I need. It's definitely a case where I'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. Also, a thing with cables is when you wrap your cables, and I'll talk about wrapping them in a little bit when we go back to the close-up camera, make sure you get some cable ties, some Velcro ties. You can get them from Walmart for like a few bucks, and they come in a pack of 20, 30, maybe 50. They definitely help keep your cables organized. So you just basically wrap around the end of the cable and then just leave the rest of it nice and loose. So we're going to connect this XLR to the left output of the soundboard, making sure that it's in there. Now when you plug an XLR cable, a female into a male, the female end of the XLR has a little button on it. So that button should click into place, and that's how you know you've got the cable connected properly. So with this one, I'm going to unravel a little more cable than I think I'm going to need. And I'm going to come right along the front of the stage, because I know I'm not going to walk here when I do this test. Okay, and then I'm going to come up with the XLR cable, and we're going to go right into input number 1 on the left speaker. And once again, I'm going to set the volume of input 1 to right to the 12 o'clock position. Now, another thing that you can do to even neaten up your cabling a little bit is just take a couple Velcro ties and just Velcro your power and your XLR cables. I usually like to Velcro them right to the stand at the top and then at the base. It cleans up the appearance a little bit. Okay, so now that we have our mains hooked up, let's hook up a monitor speaker. I'm only going to hook up one, but if you have to hook up two, if your board, if your soundboard has, more than one auxiliary output or more than one monitor send, you would basically hook them up the same way. If you've got two monitors, but you just only need to send a single monitor send, these powered speakers have an output on them, an XLR output. So you can easily link two speakers together with just a simple XLR cable. So I've got a couple monitor speakers back here. These are Alto TX310s. The mains, by the way, are Alto TS212s. So the monitor, before I put it in position, I'm just going to set it right there just so I can make the connections really quickly. We're going to grab a power cable. And then I'm simply going to plug it right into the power socket on the back of this, on the back of the monitor speaker. We're going to make sure that the speaker is in the off position, the power switch, and it is. Now, one thing to keep in mind with your mixer is take a look at what kind of output your monitor send is, whether it's a 1/4 inch or an XLR, because you're going to want to make sure you have the right kind of cable. This particular soundboard has a 1/4 inch monitor out, and it'll take either a balanced or an unbalanced. So we're just going to take our TRS to XLR male, which is what I have here. We're going to take the TRS end and go into the monitor out. And then we're simply going to chain a short microphone cable right to this XLR. So we basically, in simple terms, we basically just transformed a 1/4-inch output to an XLR output. So now that I've done that, I can take an XLR cable. I'm just going to grab a short one here because it's not going very far. And I'm going to take the XLR female end. I might have called this a female end earlier, but this is actually the male end. I'm going to take the female end of this XLR cable and go into the male end of the XLR to TRS cable. And sometimes you might have to press down on the button to get the XLR connector in there. But to make sure it's seated right, just give it a gentle tug, and if it doesn't move, then you're good to go. And then we're just simply going to take the other end of the XLR cable, and we're going to go right into the input of our monitor. And again, I'm going to make sure that the input knob is on 12 o'clock. Now I'm going to set the monitor down where it's supposed to go. Now, most of these powered speakers, if you look at the shape of the back of them, the corners might be angled. That means that this speaker is designed to sit on that angle, and it's going to angle up probably at like a 40 at a diagonal to be able to be aimed at the performer for them to hear themselves. So this particular monitor is going to go, I'm going to go right like that. So now I have my main speakers aimed outward for the audience, and now I've got a monitor speaker aimed at me so that I can hear what's going on. Now, like I said, I could connect a second monitor in the same way that I just did, because this soundboard has that extra auxiliary send. Or if I just am using one monitor mix, but I'd like to have two monitors, maybe one on each side, for maybe a fuller sound, I can simply take the XLR output of this speaker into the XLR input of my second monitor and just set that monitor over here. Okay, we have our speakers hooked up. Just going to check the comments. Nope, I haven't moved yet. I'm still in South Berwick, Maine. I don't move until the end of August. And I'll probably do this workshop again when I'm down there for anybody that might be interested. And I don't know, I might stream that one too. Okay, so taking a look at my connections here. Okay, so we've done the mains, we've done the monitors. Now we're going to connect the microphone. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically just use, actually before I do that, I'm going to switch back to my camera and talk about mic stands really quick before we hook up our monitor. Well, we're basically going to connect the microphone to, now you know what, we'll just make the connection. I'll talk about mic stands when I get to the extra stuff. I'm kind of, flying off the handle with this a little bit. And you know what, we'll use the boom stand. So I'm basically just going to take my microphone, put it into the boom stand, and then we're going to take an XLR cable, yet another one. I've probably got about 40 of them, because like I said, you can never have enough of these cables. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect the male XLR into the input on channel 1 on the soundboard. And then I'm going to connect the female end. And you can tell it's the female end because it's got it's got a button on it. I'm going to connect that into the mic, and the button is going to click into place, and that's how I know the microphone is connected. All right, so congratulations, we have just set up a basic sound system. Now, we're going to test it out. You guys aren't going to hear the main speakers over the live stream, but you will hear what's coming off of the soundboard, basically into StreamYard. So what I'm going to do is simply, to power on the system, I'm going to turn the soundboard on, and then I'm going to go over and I'm going to turn the speakers on. I just want to check one little bitty thing first. There we go. All right. Just had to check that. All right. So now I'm going to turn the mains on. I'm also going to turn the monitor on. Now, when you power on a sound system, it's very, very important the order of things that you power on. You want to power on your mixer first, and then any other things like if you've got effects or anything like that. That stuff always gets powered on first. Your speakers get powered on last. Because if I were to turn the speakers on first and then turn the mixer on, you're going to get a very loud bang, and it might ruin your speakers, and it might ruin some other stuff, like somebody's hearing. When you shut off your sound system, you're going to turn the speakers off first, and then you're going to turn everything else off. You know, your mixer, your effects units, things like that. So again, your system's not going to create a loud pop and then damage something. Okay, so now that we have the system on, I'm going to go back to the, I'm going to go ahead and go back to the view of the soundboard, and we're going to start making the connections. We're going to start making some adjustments. All right, there we go. So here we are at the soundboard. The soundboard is powered on. All the channels are muted, and you can tell the channels are muted. I don't know why this one isn't. There it is. All the channels are muted, so that's good. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the main volume up to, let's go to -10. And we're going to bring both the left and the right because they're going to control each speaker separate. Now what I'm going to do is, for a vocal mic, I'm going to turn on the low cut. That's going to get rid of any low-end rumble that you might get on a vocal mic when it's being touched, or when the stand is being touched, or when, you know, somebody gets blowing into it. So things like that. Now what I'm going to do to check the level, the input level of the mic, which is adjusted here, is I have the board in what's called pre-fade listen mode, and that is this switch right here. If I press in the solo button, which is here, that light is going to light up, and then this light's going to light up. Now, depending on what mode the board is in, if this button is pushed out, it's in main solo mode, which basically means if I press this button, it mutes all the other channels except for that channel 1. If I press in this button, now we're in pre-fade listen mode. So what's going to happen is I'm going to tap this mic, and what I'm also going to do is assign it to the mains by pressing this button here. Now I'm tapping the mic just to see if I got some signal going into it. Now I'm going to talk into it. Check 1, 2, check 1, 2, check, check, check. That's a little much, so I'm going to back the gain off. Check 1, 2, check 1, 2, check 1, 2. Still a little much. Let's go around 12 o'clock. Check 1, 2, check 1, 2. Okay, I'm going to go up a little bit. Check 1, 2, check, 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 check 1, 2. Hey. Hey, 1, 2, check, check, check. All right, so I'm going to call that good. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute my, my headset mic that I'm talking into right now, and I'm going to slowly start to bring the input of this microphone up with this fader. So you're going to start hearing me come in. So All right, well, you know what would help is if I unmute the channel. All right, 1, 2, check. Now we got some sound, and we've got a lot of it. And we've got some feedback too. So I'm going to go ahead and mute the channel again, and I'm going to make a couple adjustments on the main speakers. So I'll be right back. All right, so I'm on the headset mic again. I'm just backing off the input volume on each main speaker to about 930, the 930 position. There we go. All right, now I'll get back on the vocal mic. So what was happening was I was looking everywhere else except for that mute button. So that's what happens when you're kind of flying off the handle and you're kind of improvising this. All right. So now I'm going to unmute that mic and we'll try it again. 1, 2, check, check, check. 1, 2, check, check, check. Cool, so I've got audio now coming into StreamYard. So now what you're hearing is you're hearing my vocal mic, the mic that we just plugged into the sound system. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to send that mic to my monitor. To do that, I'm going to turn up the monitor knob. Actually, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to unmute my monitor. I'm going to bring this up to maybe about negative 20. And then I'm going to slowly start to bring up my monitor until I can hear it. 1, 2, check, 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 check. 1, 2, check, check. There it is. And now I've got monitor. 1, 2, check, 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 check. Now, as I'm checking this microphone, I'm hearing I've got a lot of low end coming out of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my EQ and I'm going to take the low knob and I'm going to cut it back a little bit. 1, 2, check, check. 1, 2, check. That's a little better. All right, so we've just EQ'd. We've just checked the mains, checked the monitors. Now, if I want to send a little reverb out, we're going to make sure that my reverb is assigned to the mains, which is right here. I'm going to turn the send knob, which is up here. I'm going to keep that at 12 o'clock. I've selected a reverb that I like, and you do that by just turning this black little knob over here and then pressing into the knob. I'm going to unmute the effects. I'm going to turn those up to unity gain. And now, once I turn up the effect knob, 1, 2, check, 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 check. Now I've got reverb on my vocal mic. All right, so the microphone works, the mains work, the monitor works. I'm going to go ahead and mute this, and I'm going to go ahead and turn on my headset mic so I can talk to you. All right, so there's my headset mic, and I'm going to come back out to the group view. There we go, and then I'm going to go back to my close-up camera. All right, so there we go. We have just put together a sound system. A very simple sound system with 2 mains plus a monitor speaker. We got our microphone working. We got everything sounding good. Everything is, I would call it just A-okay. All right, I'm going to move my music stand back. That's got my presentation notes, and and I've also got the controls for my presentation. Okay, so I should be. All right, just checking to make sure I've got signal coming into StreamYard from the headset mic. All right, so I'm going to talk about a couple other things. Remember when I mentioned that if you want to hook like a guitar or a keyboard or any kind of an instrument that has that 1/4-inch output with an instrument cable to your system, well, you can do that if your mixer is kind of on the stage. But number one, to keep your cables neat, and number two, to prevent unwanted noise like hums or anything like that coming into your system, you're going to want to convert that unbalanced signal to a balanced signal. And to do that, we're going to use something called a direct box. So, and I happen to have one, I've got one right here. So this just has an input, and it's got a 1/4 inch output. So if you wanted to link it to, something else, like for example, I would basically take a keyboard in here and then out to either my own personal mixer or a monitor. So this is kind of a splitter in a way too, because we got an output here, and then we've got an XLR out here. Now, this particular direct box is a passive direct box, so it's very, very simple. It does have a switch over here that goes between instrument and line, and this basically adjusts how much signal is coming into the direct box. So when it's set to instrument, it's going to be a very hot signal coming in. When it's set to line, it's going to be a very soft signal. Actually, that adjusts what's coming out of the direct box. So instrument basically means the output of this is going to be very hot, and then line is going to be the output is very, very soft. So we also have a ground lift switch on here. Now let's say you plug something into this DI, and you've got a little bit of a hum coming through, and it's going to sound like a 60 cycle hum. It's going to sound a little bit higher than like a low B flat. If that happens, there's a ground lift switch that you can flip, and it should get rid of that hum. Now that's a passive direct box. If you look on the presentation, you'll also see that we have a picture of an active direct box. So an active direct box requires either a battery, like this Behringer D120, or it can be phantom powered. Now this direct box has a little bit more functionality in that we have an attenuator switch, which basically means if the signal is coming out too hot, you can basically take that switch and you can drop the signal by, looks like 20 dB or 40 dB. We also have a mode switch, which is basically, it can be a 2-channel direct box, or it can act as a splitter as well. And then it also has a ground lift on it. So that's really, really cool. But remember that if you get an active direct box, it does require phantom power. Okay, so that's a little bit about direct boxes. Now, what if you have your mixer not on the stage, but if you have it in the back of the room? That's a really handy place to have your mixer, because then if you're mixing for your audience, you can hear exactly what your system is outputting. But you don't want to run a bunch of 100-foot XLR cables. So what do? We use something called a snake. No, not the scary kind, not the animal kind. This is a cable snake. So this is basically a bunch of tiny cables, little balanced cables inside one big giant cable. I happen to have, if I get closer to the camera, I've got one down here. So what I have down here is a 16-channel snake. Now the stage box is labeled, but then again, so are the cables. So for example, this one is labeled as, input 1. So this male XLR is going to plug into the soundboard, and it's going to correspond to input number 1 on this guy here, which is your stage box. Now this particular snake has 16 channels on it, but it's got 8 returns. So you can basically plug your mains. You've got room for a pair of mains, a pair of subwoofers, and 4 monitors. So you've got plenty of room on that snake. The thing is, that's a tip ring sleeve snake, so it's an older one. Most modern ones will have either the option of using tip ring sleeve or XLR. But then there's another kind of snake too. If you have a digital console, you might have the option of getting a digital snake, which is basically the stage box, but without the cable. The cable is going to be basically a Cat 5 or a Cat 6, and this is an Ethercon cable, so it's not your typical RJ45 plastic, Ethernet connector. This one is protected, so it's a little bit more durable. But all you're going to do is basically connect this into the digital output on your digital board and connect the other end into your digital stage box on the other end. So it's more lightweight, it's more portable, easier to handle than, say a 30 or a 40 pound, 100-foot cable snake. So that's really a way to keep the cable management nice and clean, especially on the stage. Furthermore, as I get closer to the camera, I do have another kind of a snake down here that I can show. So snakes can also be used on stage, and what you can do there is, let's say you've got 8 drum mics. We don't want to run 8 cables all the way to the stage box, because then it's going to be a mess. So I can use something called a drop snake or a sub snake. And again, we've got labels on one end, labels on the other. Now this kind of snake has what we call a fan. Basically, it's a fan of connectors on either end, but they also come in, you've got a fan on one end and a small stage box on the other end. So these are very, very handy for cable management. I like using these on, like I said, miking up a drum kit. Okay. So we've covered kind of basics there. Actually, I'm going to cover one more thing, and that is microphone stands. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just, channel's muted, so I can just simply disconnect the microphone from our system, and I'll just put that away. And we'll talk about how to handle microphone stands. So there are many types of microphone stands. I've got 2 of them right here. I'm actually going to move some stuff out of the way. And my iPad is also sitting on a mic stand that has an iPad attachment to it. So I've got a straight stand here, straight microphone stand. This one has a solid base on the bottom of it. Let me get back into camera here. So straight mic stand with a solid base. This is good if you just got a singer and all they do is sing. Or if you've got a somebody that's speaking, for a presentation or anything. Or if you're somebody that, if you're a singer that holds their mic regularly and you just need a place to put it during, an intermission or before or after the show, that's what the straight stand is for. And then we've got a boom stand here. So this particular boom stand has a tripod base, and then it comes up. We've got a clutch here to adjust the height of the main part of the stand, and then we've got some more adjustments for the angle and how far the boom extends. Now, the way you assemble one of these, a little bit different than the round base weighted, mic stand. All that is the center, the center part of the stand just screws into the base of this mic stand here. You do want to be careful with these screws because they are very fine threaded, and if you wind up, you could very easily cross thread them and they won't work right anymore. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take this wing nut here. We're going to very carefully loosen it up. We're going to take this base all the way to the bottom. I see a lot of people just stop the base here and leave a little bit of the stand on the bottom because it supposedly makes the stand more stable. It really doesn't. Because if that bottom is sitting on the floor, the stand could rock back and forth. The only thing you want touching the bottom are the 3 feet on the tripod. So you want to make sure that that wing nut is firm, but remember, again, like I said with the speaker stands, don't over tighten, because you could damage some stuff. Some of the less expensive microphone stand might have plastic parts. So if you over tighten, you could wind up cracking the plastic. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to undo the clutch that's about halfway up the stand. This allows me to adjust the height of the stand like this. I know it's hard to see on camera, but I'll try to move back a little bit. There we go. So I'm going to set that, and I'm going to tighten the clutch. Again, be careful not to over tighten. Now I've got another adjustment right here. We're going to loosen that. That adjusts the angle of the boom. So I'm going to go ahead and set that. Tighten it up. Be careful not to over tighten it again. I can't stress that enough. And now with this attachment up here, we can now adjust the length of the boom. So if you're a keyboard player and your keyboard's here, you might have to put the stand over on the side to be out of the way of your keyboard, and then you might have to angle it down like this. Now, if you do have to do that, and then just spin the boom so that the microphone is facing towards you like this, and I'll just go ahead and put a microphone on it really quick. One thing you want to keep in mind, though, when you do this, is the microphone stand might tip because there might be a little too much weight on the stand. To fix that, make sure one of the tripod legs is in the exact same direction of this boom arm. So I'm going to line the boom arm up with one of the tripod legs. So basically, when I look down to the bottom of the stand, the one tripod leg and the boom are in the same direction. That is going to keep this boom, the whole stand, from tipping over this way. Also, just make sure that you're not doing something too heavy, because it could still tip. There we go. So there we go. So now I've got a properly adjusted microphone boom. What I like to do, though, is when I play keyboards, this goes at the back of the keyboard, behind the keyboard stand, and then this just goes like that, so I can just shorten the boom arm a little bit, and then I won't have to worry about whether or not the stand is going to fall over or not. So there's a couple of things to keep in mind about mic stands. All right, get those out of the way. All right, so there's a couple of more things that I want to talk about. And really, these have to deal with, make sure I'm good on camera here. These really have to deal with some things that can happen. Okay, so you've got your sound system, you've got your PA system all hooked up. Everything's working. Everything sounds good, but there are still some things that can happen. There are two big ones that I want to talk about. The first one is probably going to be the most common thing, and that is feedback. What is feedback? Feedback is what happens when a microphone hears itself. When that happens, if the microphone is too loud, your system could start squealing like a crying newborn baby that hasn't had his bottle. And it can be very, very loud, and it can damage your system. So it can damage your system, but it can also damage your hearing if it's not taken care of. Okay, if it does start to happen, if you start to hear a little bit of it, Um, the first thing you want to do is bring that particular channel's volume down until the feedback stops. That's if it's happening slowly. That's one thing you can do. If you can hear and listen to where the feedback is happening, you might be able to take your master EQ, and if your EQ has an LED system that'll show you where that feedback is happening, you might be able to take that particular band on the EQ, on a graphic EQ, and just dip it down a little bit until it stops feeding back. If it happens suddenly, what you want to do is mute that offending channel right away, take the channel fader all the way down, unmute the channel, and then slowly raise that fader up until it starts to feed back. If it starts to feed back, start backing it off. And like I said, it can happen if your whole system might be too loud. If that might be the case, then just take your master faders and just bring them back, bring the whole thing back till the system stops feeding back. Also, proper EQ, like I was saying, on a channel can help with eliminating feedback as well. So, like I said, quickly listen to where the feedback is happening frequency-wise, whether it's in the low, whether it's in the mid, or whether it's in the high, and then just take that frequency and just drop it until you don't hear any feedback anymore. So those are some ways to stop feedback if it happens. Here are some ways to prevent feedback from ever happening. Now, like I said, these things, even if you follow them, it still might happen. So that's what the first, little group of tips was for, if it does start to happen. Here are some things you can do to hopefully avoid feedback altogether. Number one, never, ever, ever point a microphone directly at a speaker. This includes pointing a microphone directly at a monitor, and I see a lot of singers do this. They'll take the mic and they'll hold it down like this, not knowing that that microphone is pointing directly at the monitor. Instant feedback. I've seen it happen many times. Also, I see this a lot too. If you've got if a performer has a system that doesn't have any monitors, they'll put the mains on the back wall behind them, and then the microphone is right in the line of fire of the mains. So number two, don't put your mains behind you. Do not put your main speakers behind you. Doesn't matter what they are. I see and I've heard of some systems that might be designed to not feedback. And those are basically just a column style like array system. And they're advertised as to not feedback, and they're designed to be placed behind you. I don't buy it. I don't recommend it. Just don't do it. Put your mains in front of you and then just set up a monitor so you can hear yourself. So, like I said, it can put the speakers in the right in the firing line of a microphone. So you always want to keep them in the front, as far to the left and as far to the right as possible. And if you can, try to get them at a height that is higher than where the microphone is. So where my speakers are right now, if I set this microphone, right where I am, I'm at just the base of the woofer of the main speakers. But I'm pretty far away from them, so the system shouldn't feedback. If it were my preference, I'd use some bigger speaker stands and I would raise them up, even more. Probably to where maybe the main cone of the speaker is probably about 7 feet off the ground. So if the mains are in front of you and they're a little bit higher, it's going to put them out of the range of this microphone. And it should help, prevent feedback. Number three, and I talked about this in the previous section about what to do if feedback happens. Number three, using a master EQ on the main speakers can certainly avoid feedback. So keep in mind not only do your speakers have a sound, but sometimes the room that you're in has a sound too. Like this room is a very bright sounding room. So it might come down to, if you have a master EQ, you might have to consider EQing the room. So if the system starts feeding back, start using your master EQ and start dialing back that feedback until it stops. But properly EQing and tuning a room can certainly avoid feedback. There is a device that you can get that is basically a speaker management system. It's called a drive rack. It's a little bit pricey. They're around $600 for the PA2 model, but if you can get the drive rack and if you can get the what's called a measurement mic, I've got one over here. This one is made by Behringer. So this is a measurement mic. This mic has a flat response across the entire audio spectrum from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. Most vocal mics might be tailored to have a little bit higher, like a boost in the high mid-range. You don't want to use one of those. You want to use a measurement mic. So what happens with the drive rack is if you plug this microphone into the front of the drive rack and you run a simple setup wizard, the drive rack will automatically tune and EQ your system to whatever room that you are in. So the microphone is going to not only listen to the speakers, but it's going to listen to the room. And it's going to automatically set an EQ curve that best matches your room. So it's a very, very nice thing to have. Number 4 in preventing feedback from ever happening is make sure your overall volume is just enough to fill the room. Don't have it really loud like a lot of DJs, like to have because, they got to have the energy of that system. The problem is a loud sound system in a small space just doesn't sound good. Okay? You want the system to just fill the room, and that's it. So like I said, just make sure the volume is just loud enough to fill the space, but not loud enough to damage somebody's hearing or even damage your system from causing feedback. Now, here's another tip. Microphones aren't the only thing that can feedback. There are some acoustic instruments that can as well, like acoustic guitars, for example. Those can feedback. If they're left, at full volume with the channel fader up, they can feedback depending on where they're positioned. Sometimes they're positioned right in front of a monitor. The best thing to do is to make sure they're EQ'd properly. And also, if that channel's not being used, just mute it, and that'll destroy the feedback. Okay, the second thing that can happen, the second most common thing that can happen, is excessive ground noise. Now, ground noise basically sounds like a 60-cycle hum. A little bit higher than a B flat. And most dryers and most kitchen appliances have that same, frequency. So that can happen because of a couple of things. It's difficult to troubleshoot, but I would say the most common thing could be a bad cable somewhere in the system. Now, this is just a simple thing. If you can track down where that cable is, if it's on a channel, just swap that cable out. It could also be in one of your mains. So let's say if your left main is humming, try swapping out the cable and see if that works. That's one cause of it. The other cause might be a faulty electrical system, or you might be in an old building with an old electrical system. That's going to be a little bit more difficult to troubleshoot. So I would say the first thing to do is invest in a good power conditioner. And it's basically a rack-mounted power strip, but there's an extra filter inside of it that can filter out any kind of dirty power, that could cause that kind of ground noise. So investing in a good power conditioner is always a good idea. And just make sure your entire system is plugged into it. You might need a couple of them, depending on how many speakers you have. You might need two. You might need one for your soundboard and your external effects and things like that, and maybe one dedicated to your speaker. It all depends on how much amperage that power conditioner has inside of it, because powered speakers can take up quite a bit of amperage. So just make sure that power conditioner can accommodate your system. Now, if that doesn't work, the second thing you can do, and it can be very, very costly, is to get an electrician out and have them inspect your system and see if any upgrades need to happen. And there are some smaller things that you can do. There are things called hum eliminators, and they can be in the form of a direct box. They can be in the form of maybe an adapter that you plug into the wall that might lift the ground. It is a bit of a gamble where it could solve the problem or it might not. So here's some other things to avoid with your system. Don't ever connect or disconnect anything from your system without taking some precautionary steps first. The first thing is, when you're making a connection to a mixer channel, make sure the channel is muted and the fader is turned all the way down. If your board doesn't have a mute button, make sure the channel is turned all the way down. Because otherwise, you could cause a big pop in the system, and it could damage your speakers or damage something else in your system. Also, in addition to that, make sure your master monitor send, make sure that's turned all the way down too. Because there might be some cases where your mixer's mute button won't mute the monitors at the same time. So failing to take those precautions could damage your speakers. And the same thing with connecting to your speakers. If you're swapping out a bad cable on your powered speaker, make sure to turn the input all the way down, or just turn the speaker right off. Then swap out your cable, and then turn your speaker back on, turn the input knob back up, and see if that does it. And I've already covered how to properly power on and power off your system. You power on the speakers last when you turn on your system, and when you turn off your system, you power off the speakers first. Because again, that's going to avoid any really loud pops or crackles or things like that, and you can avoid damaging your system. And make sure to follow that procedure, very, very carefully. All right, the last thing that I want to talk about in this presentation, in this workshop, is really, really important. And I just completely neglected my presentation. There's the ground loop. But it's really important to know your system. Really, really important. Now, there's a couple other topics that I want to cover under this. Number one, you might say, manuals? We don't need no stinking manuals. Nah, they're useless. No. Make sure to read all of your manuals, all the owner's manuals that come with your equipment. Okay? It's really, really important. It's cumbersome, but it's important. Make sure to read all the documentation that comes with the various parts of your system. It'll help you understand the features, how things work for each piece of equipment. Now, I will also say this. Most equipment nowadays will come with just a quick start guide, and it's just to really get you up and running with your system. The full manual, you'll have to go onto their website and just download a PDF. I guess it's a way to save the trees. I prefer having a fully printed owner's manual. So yeah, read your manuals, and it'll really help you understand how to use your equipment. And the very last thing is to practice listening. It's very, very crucial that any sound engineer practice this skill, as well as any musician. Any musician and any up-and-coming sound engineer should learn how to practice listening. It's really important to know how your PA system sounds and how it reacts to different types of music. So, how do you do this? You set up your system and you connect any media device, like a phone, a tablet, to the proper channels on your mixer. On this soundboard, we have RCA connectors, and you can easily get a dual RCA to 1/8" stereo connector to plug in your phone, or you could do a stereo tip ring sleeve 1/8" to 2/4", and you can go into one of the stereo channels. And that's handy because that'll allow you to check your monitors too. Once it's hooked up, start listening to some music through your system, but don't just listen to stuff you like. Listen to a wide variety of things. Okay, maybe even some stuff that you might not like, because not all genres, not all types of music sound the same. So a good clean jazz recording might sound different than a heavy rock track, or a classical recording might sound different than a modern R&B or a dance track. So really take your time and listen to everything. Listen to a wide variety of things and really get to know the way your system responds to each type of music. And do so at a comfortable volume. Again, just enough to fill the room. Because if you go too loud, you're not going to get an accurate picture of what your system sounds like. So the more that you do this, the more that you practice this listening, the more that you're going to get to know your system better. Also, when you're mixing a live band, and this applies to listening, don't be quick to make adjustments to the mix, unless there's like a technical emergency, like a feedback or a ground loop or something like that. When you need to change something in the mix, listen for a bit, and if you hear something out of balance or something that might need to be tweaked, do it little by little so that the audience doesn't really know that something is being changed. Because if you go too far, it's going to distract from the performance, or it's going to distract from the service if you're in a church setting. You want to make sure that you listen to the mix for a bit, make an adjustment, and then listen again and see if that helped. And then something else might pop up, like, oh, the vocal might need a little bit more reverb. Okay, turn up the reverb a little bit. Just do it little by little. The tiniest bit can go a long way. So again, when you're mixing, don't make quick adjustments because it will distract from, whatever's going on. Do it slowly and remember to listen. Like I said, a little goes a long way. Overall, relax and have fun. Especially if a technical thing comes up like feedback, the worst thing you can do is panic because you're not going to know where that feedback's coming from. You're going to be panicking all over, pushing a bunch of buttons, and then messing something else up. You have to relax and take in the, the mental information. Oh, feedback is happening. Where is it happening? Okay, channel 1. All right, bring it down a little bit. EQ it a little bit. Oh, that fixed it. Oh, no problem. Be calm, relax, and enjoy this new adventure, with your system. Again, whether you're at a house of worship, whether you're, again, setting up a concert venue and you want to really get into, how this all works and understand how it works, the biggest thing is it should be relaxing and it should be fun. It shouldn't be a chore with your system. Don't let your equipment work against you. Make sure you get equipment that works for you. And that leads me into one final little thing. When you purchase equipment, don't just go for the first thing you see. And also, don't go for the cheapest thing you see. Because again, you want your equipment to work for you and not against you. And if you spend too little on a piece of equipment like a mixer, there's going to be some chance that you might have some issues from the get-go. So stay away from like Amazon and stay away from, brands that you've never heard of, no-name brands. Make sure you do your research when you purchase equipment. I prefer to purchase from Sweetwater, but there's another site called Zounds where you can purchase, name brand equipment at, reasonable prices, and there's something at every price level. The cool thing about Zounds is I'm an affiliate with them through my YouTube channel. So right below the video in the description, if you click the Show More button, you'll see a link over to the Zounds website. If you click that link and you make purchases over there, I get a little bit of a percentage of it. So you're not only helping yourself with getting the right equipment that you need, but you're also helping to support this channel too. Shameless plug, I know. But overall, relax, enjoy, and have fun with it. So that's going to conclude this workshop. I had a lot of fun doing this, and I hope you had a lot of fun watching it, and I hope you got something out of it. I hope it was, useful to you. I'm just going to go quickly right through my YouTube, stuff. So be sure to, if you liked this particular workshop or anything else on my channel, be sure to subscribe to my channel by just clicking the subscribe button. You'll get notified too if you click the notification button too. You'll get notified anytime I go live or anytime I release a new video, things like that. If you're interested in checking out any of my music, head over to my Bandcamp page, which is justinhaveyou.bandcamp.com. You can also purchase some music there, and that also helps support this channel and helps keep it going too. So that's been Keeping It Simple with PA Systems. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Take care.